What's doing, everybody? Welcome to First Class Fatherhood. I'm Alec, and before I hit you with today's interview, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the link in the description so you can listen to all of the interviews I've done with so many tremendous dads, including Dana White, Deion Sanders, Tony Hawk, and so many others. Now let's get going with today's interview. Joining me now, First Class Father, Nick Ayers. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
It's great to be here. As I just told you, it's a little supernatural. I'm a fan of the show, and I think you're doing a good thing here.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's an honor to have you on board today. Let's start right here. How many kids do you have, and how old are they?
We have 3 children. It's 2 boys and a girl, and they're all 7 years old. So, and on top of that, their birthday is 12/12/12 of all days. So wow. It's pretty neat to have triplets on 12/12/12.
Very cool. Now, do you have them in sports or activities yet? Do they all do the same thing, or they all kind of have different interests with that?
Yeah, no, they all are into similar and different things. So like our daughter loves tennis. She loves turkey hunting with me. She's probably our best turkey hunter and started doing that when she was 3 years old. Our boys are both into basketball and baseball, but are gifted differently in each sport. Both in sort of understanding the game and their academic capability, their understanding the game, but their athletic prowess. Whereas one child really exceeds at baseball and power hitting, but also loves horseback riding. The other son excels at basketball and enjoys riding dirt bikes. All 3 of them love the outdoors. They love being in any kind of hunting stand or deer blind. If I take them to do that, which I do quite often, they all enjoy 4-wheelers and dirt bikes, and really they just like anything being outside.
Yeah, that's awesome, Nick. Now, did you guys find out what you were having as far as all 3 of the sexes of the kids, or did you wait for that till they came out?
We knew early on. My wife was in a high-risk pregnancy, and so we initially thought we were having twins and knew it was a boy and a girl. And it's really a touching story. They called it baby C. They kept saying baby C has no amniotic fluid and therefore wouldn't make it. And they couldn't tell because the amniotic fluid was so low. They couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl. But medically speaking, they said, look, it's irrelevant. The pregnancy will self-terminate sooner rather than later. And we kept going back. Again, as a high risk pregnancy, they wanted it monitored with some frequency. And in the coming months, they'd say, well, baby C, we can now tell you what it is, but it's still not a viable embryo. And we just kept praying for a miracle. And we got one when pretty late in the pregnancy, they said, this is stunning, but there's a lot of amniotic fluid. The baby C is caught up, and we can tell you that you're going to have a boy. So we have two boys and a girl, and they're such blessings. And really, we look back on the pregnancy, and while I think in hindsight we would consider it all stressful or anxious, but really we just had so much peace throughout it, and it was such a time of excitement and anticipation.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible, Nick. And if you could, just take a minute here to kind of hit my listeners with a little bit about your background and what you do.
So I grew up west of Atlanta, and at the time when I grew up, it was a small town. It's not anymore. It's Austell, Georgia. And always had a passion for working and real jobs, and started working at a car wash when I was a kid to make extra money. I would ride my bicycle there in middle school and detailed cars and cut yards throughout middle school. Started working in a local bank in high school with the dream of being a local banker. I really wanted to be president of the local bank. And shortly after graduating high school, developed a real affinity for politics and had always liked reading the news, the newspaper, and watching the local news. But my freshman year in college, got pretty involved in politics, and just sort of a fascinating thing. A state senator came along and said, none of the political professionals believe that I can win this governor's race. And so I'm trying to find a group of young people who really believe that we can transform the state. And he gave me and a few of what became my best friends a really unique opportunity to play a real role in his campaign for governor. And he assembled what was essentially, in hindsight, sort of like a bad news bearers of politics. It was So that ended up being successful. It was a great opportunity to have that kind of success. It was good fate, good fortune, though I worked hard to take advantage of an opportunity. And 4 years later, that same governor asked me to lead his reelection campaign. So there was, I think, 50 or 60 staff, 45 to 55 staff, $30 to $35 million budget, and I had the opportunity to lead that effort at an early age. I was 23 and 24 throughout that 2 year campaign, and we were successful. Right after he won re-election. It was a bad year for Republicans in 2006, so we sort of stood out as a bright spot. And he got a call from the National Republican Governors Association that they wanted Sonny to lead the RGA. He didn't have any national ambitions, but he basically said, if you'll let these young guys run the organization that have led my political effort in Georgia, I'll chair it, but I want them to lead it. And so from the time I was 24 until I guess I was 28, I led what at the time became the biggest political committee in the country, the RGA, and just had a great team working with me. And we laid out a plan to exponentially grow the number of Republican governors. We were in the teens when I took over and left, I believe, at 29, but it grown the fundraising apparatus significantly, and just the national brand and capability of what a political committee could do in D.C. for state-based candidates. And it was during that time I met a guy named Mike Pence. And the result of that was years later, I would get a call, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm shortening the story, but from Mike Pence and people close to Donald Trump who had an interest in me leading the vice presidential effort once they had selected Pence, which was something I had to think about because I had 3 or 4 year old triplets at the time and knew the commitment that would take. I had built up a private and successful business here in Atlanta. I was beginning to exit out of politics day to day, and had built some other verticals in advertising and corporate consulting, but really felt called to help a good man and a good cause. And so traveled around the country for them, with them for the 2016 campaign through the convention, the debates. And when we succeeded, had the honor of helping in a pretty significant or a senior way at the transition. And then shortly after the inauguration, got a phone call that they'd like for me to consider joining the administration, which was a difficult decision for my wife and I because Atlanta had always been home. Again, we had these young triplets, and being a good, husband and father was a real priority. And it was hard for me to envision how I would be able to successfully do both, work in a senior position in the White House and also be a good husband and father. But through a lot of prayer and, serious conversations with my wife and people I trusted, we decided that for a season of life that was the most important thing we could do. And so we moved to Washington, and the last couple of years spent that time as Mike Pence's chief of staff in the West Wing, and it was a great honor to do it. I left in early 2019, so about a year ago, and have been back in Atlanta with my wife and kids and rebuilding a business since.
Yeah, that's an incredible ride you've had here, Nick, and I can only imagine the kind of work and effort that does go into keeping up that type of lifestyle, that type of career, that type of effort. About how old were you then when you had the triplets, and how did becoming a father kind of change your perspective on life?
I was 30 years old when I had the kids, and when my wife had the children. I was there to witness it, and what a great day it was. And I would say it changed everything. It's a cliche. I tell all the new parents that I'm friends with, up front, I'm like, look, there are some cliches about parenting, but we found them all to be true. And it really does completely change your life. In our case, it's changed our life for the better. Probably the first thing that comes to mind, and you asking that question, because it caught me so off guard, was someone who I respected a lot, was pretty close to, called me while we were still in the hospital. I think the kids were a day or two old. And some of your listeners probably know her. She's a former governor, former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley. She called to check on my wife and I and congratulate us. And she said, I just want to tell you something about parenting. And that someone told me, and it's really stuck with me over the last 10 or 15 years. I said, okay. She said, you're going to discover a love that you didn't know was possible in the way that you're going to love these three children. And she paused for a second. She said, and you're also going to discover an anxiety and level of worry that it comes only with the association of that new level of love that you've never felt, a new level of both love and worry. And that stuck with me as something at the time. I thought, yeah, I already love things like my wife so much and our dog so much and the career that I have. I know I will love my children that much, but it's in the years since of becoming a father, I now every day understand a little more of what she meant by that, which is until you're a father, you can't conceive of loving anything as much as you love your own children. And I know my wife feels the same way. And certainly our highest devotion and commitment is to one another. But and there's just another level of love that comes associated with the children that you create. But also with that is, what changed my life is I had up until that point always been so hard charging and never second guessed anything I felt strongly about. I pursued it with 110%. To change it or to win or whatever it was with no looking back. And every day that those children have grown a day older, they very much factored into how does this impact them and how does this impact their future? How does this impact my time with them? How does this impact my ability to be a good husband to my wife, a good father to my children? And so it totally changed everything about the way I operate professionally. But I would say it's for the better because they're more important. And since having children, it's certainly I never feel like it's inhibited or encumbered in any way my potential for success. But there have certainly been times when I've chosen what I think of as success at home over maybe success in government or politics or in business.
Yeah, very well said, Nick. And, I always say, like, for my wife, we have 4 children, and for my wife and I, making the jump from 2 to 3 was the most challenging that we had. You got that all in one shot. So how do you kind of like, with having triplets, how do you kind of prioritize if more than one kid needs to be changed at a time and feeding? Like, how did you guys happen to manage all that stuff?
My wife is a logistical and organizational genius, really. It's not my strength, but really, I could, if I walked you back through, videos or pictures of when our kids were infants and even toddlers, I so respected what my wife did then, but now in hindsight, respect it even more because she just provided this incredibly clean, organized, stable, happy home to raise these children in. And that's really a testament to her gifts and strengths. So it never felt like we had to choose one over the other. She had such a good plan in place, almost like an assembly line of the ways to feed them, the ways to change them, to burp them, to get them back to bed. And look, I also think pain is relative, right? It's all we know. So I think it would have been much harder to probably, if we had one child and then a few years later had triplets, we'd have something to compare it against. But for us, it's all we've ever known. And it's just been, while challenging at times, obviously, whether you have one kid or 5, I think there are obvious challenges to parenting, but it really has been just such a great gift. The one thing we try to watch, we try to watch several things, but is that we never wanted their identity to be the triplets. And so while we never controlled what other people said about them, we made the decision early on that even casually we wouldn't refer to them as that we would refer to them, as their individual identity, and to make sure that they grew up with their own identity and be proud of the fact that they had 2 siblings, but that their whole identity wasn't wrapped up in being a triplet. And so going back to one of your first questions about what activities do they like, we've never tried to get them to all excel or be good at or do the same thing. We had one son who really wanted to pursue horseback riding, and we thought that was important that he was able to do it. And within a month, of course, the other two said, well, now we want to do that too. And we said, no, that's Talton's thing. He thought of that. He was willing to sacrifice other things to be able to make time to do that. And so we want to support him in that. And it's been very similar, whether it's in golf or tennis, or their favorite foods, that we try to preserve their individual identities, despite them being triplets. And then another, and really the outdoors have given me, this ability to do this, is that when I go hunting, I said to my wife a few years ago when I realized I can't do this well with 3 at a time. And if I can really do it 1 at a time, not only do they get a lot more out of the experience because I'm able to really teach them the values and safety lessons and instructions of hunting, but I was blown away at the different side I saw to each of my kids in the outdoors. I don't want to get emotional, but when it was just the two of us, the conversations you have, and the things they're willing to say, and sort of how they open up. It's not a sad thing. It's such a beautiful thing that as I learned that, probably around the time they were 3 and 4, we started really seeing that one-on-one time, while it was great to spend time as a family, and we really prioritize that, you learn so much more about your children, when you carve out time for just them.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Nick, that's one of the challenging things, too. Like I said, I have 4 kids, and to find that time, even if it's just a walk to the store, to the bodega to get something, it means the world to them when they get that isolated time. So, and it does create those special moments. And for them, it's like the center of their whole day, and it really makes them feel special. So I know that's definitely one of the challenges. How about as far as disciplining the kids, Nick? What type of disciplinarian are you as a dad, and is it different than the discipline style you grew up with?
We expected obedience early, and we didn't tolerate disrespect. We made our expectations clear, and they were high ones, and have been and still are our kids' greatest cheerleaders. But if they intentionally disobey or disrespect us, there have always been consequences. And obviously, with age, we've adjusted that. But we just found, early on, this is probably going to sound a little odd, but we early on made the decision not to talk to our kids like babies or children, but explain things obviously in ways they can understand, but just explain our expectations, make clear our expectations and what the guardrails were and are. Ensure that they're in a situation where they can actually succeed in that environment, never have unrealistic expectations. But we've from the beginning had sort of a high level of expectation of what we wanted them to act like in terms of how they would honor and respect us. And again, we didn't expect perfection. I mean, look, every day I fall short of what I'm called to do, and every day I make mistakes. So we've never had unrealistic expectations, but we've had high expectations. We've been their biggest cheerleaders. But when they've intentionally fallen short or intentionally disrespected us, there were consequences, and at times, from a kid's perspective, severe ones. And we also found that the children, that each of our kids responded to different things in different ways. For one of our kids, being separated from us was the greatest form of punishment. So if I popped his behind or popped him on the leg, he, there was really no change in behavior. It didn't bother him. But if we said, if you want to act like that way, you're going to go to the room, you're going to sit on your bed with no books, and you're going to sit quietly with the door closed. To him, that was a big deal, and it changed behavior. Whereas another child, the looking at him harshly or popping him on the leg, was pretty devastating. He didn't like disappointing us. And so the fact that we had clear guidelines, guardrails, empowered them to get there, were their biggest cheerleaders, gave them unconditional love. But when the conditions warranted discipline, we gave it to them, and we gave it to them consistently. The result of that is we haven't had to discipline them that much. They're I think all parents and deservingly so are biased about their kids, and they think they have great kids. But we just think we have wonderful kids, and they have tender hearts, and they seek to honor the adults around them and be respectful. And when they get out of line now, it usually doesn't require severe punishment. They're at the age now where you can explain, look, this is not accepted, and here are the consequences if it happens again, and it usually doesn't. But I think that we're at that point now because early on we didn't really make exceptions. Where there was continued slippage, we would ramp up the consequences for it. And so I would just say consistency, never acting out in anger on anything we've done. The motive behind it has been, look, you're getting in trouble because we love you and we don't like it any more than you, but here are the consequences. Consistency, and my wife and I having each other's back. We also early on made the decision that we would always back each other's play, even if in the short term we didn't disagree with it, that we felt like if our kids could play us against one another, that would be harmful for our marriage and not a good look to them. And they know now they're at the age where we'll say, obviously, mommy and daddy don't agree on everything. But once we make a decision, we honor each other's decisions. And I think having that consistency so they couldn't play us off of one another has really benefited not only our kids, because they don't feel like it's worth the energy to work the jury. They know if dad said it, mom's going to back it up, and vice versa. But finally, I'd just say, never acting out of anger. We really made the pact with each other that we would never discipline them in anger, but that we would do it, thoughtfully and lovingly. But that doesn't mean that there hasn't been some harsh consequences. There have been, but just our kids were never in a situation where it was, wow, I'm getting disciplined and there's a lot of anger. We feel like, making your children scared is probably not a great idea.
Yeah, good stuff, Nick. And I'm the same way here with my kids. I have some that you could tell him the stove is hot all day long, and he's not going to listen until he actually touches it and says, "Ow, this is hot." The other one, he'll listen. So I mean, I think part of the journey of parenting is trying to find those ways into their heart and into their mind, and trying to figure out the different ways. What about as far as technology, Nick? I mean, that's a big challenge for all of us right now with the video games, the YouTube and stuff. Have you introduced them to the technology? Are they swiping screens or not yet?
Very limited. It's not an Apple tablet. I don't want to give the brand a shout out. I'm not actually a huge fan of it, but it is a safe, very kid friendly tablet. Even then, it's really limited when they get to use it. We disabled the Wi-Fi features where it's an impossibility for them to be able to search on the internet or download what they want. And so for special occasions, or if they've it's something they can work towards, is time with their they call it their game, that they get it from us and we know what's on it. So safe programming, safe games, good education, STEM modeling, things they can do. Even with that, we feel like at this age the best thing they can be doing is exploring outside, building forts, playing basketball, team sports, individual sports, using their imagination around the house. That our kids, because we're not a real technology-friendly family for our kids, what they come up with in terms of games they play with each other or even in isolation has blown our mind. And we've seen the sort of the fruits. It's not to say this is the only way to do it, but we've seen the fruits of being very limited in technology just by their desire to again use their imagination, to read books, to have us read to them. I feel like they've got the rest of their life to be on their iPhone or a tablet or a computer, and that really at this age, as their brain is forming, it's learning all the other cognitive skills that they need to do away from a screen. And so we just, this because I've heard you talk about it and your other dads on this podcast. The statistics around what kids are exposed to, and the average age of when young boys and girls are exposed to pornography is staggering, and it's undeniable. It's objective third-party statistics. The statistics around the addiction rates of young kids that once that's what their brain uses for stimulation are staggering, and so we use it as sort of a part of a reward system. They like it. They don't love it. In terms of television time, they probably watch the TV once or twice a week. It's sort of a privilege that they work towards, and or sometimes it's just because it's a rainy day and we say, "You all been great all day. You've played with with one another, and there have been no arguments." We'll turn on the TV for half an hour or an hour. We've gone through, normally Friday night is family movie night, where we'll order their favorite pizza and then we'll watch a movie together. And so we've gone through a lot of the old classics together as a family. Some movies that I'd never watched or heard of, and that's a real treat for all of us. But to answer your question, we've been pretty limited on the technology front, if for no other reason, and putting the risk aside, which I think are severe and legit. There's just so many other great things to do when you have 3 7-year-olds.
Yeah, I agree. And the best thing I love about the technology, like you said there, you're able to archive some of these things. Like I get to sit there on Saturday mornings, and instead of watching whatever there is on there, I'll put the Looney Tunes on, or I'll put on, an old Three Stooges and stuff like that I really enjoy to watch, and I get a chance to share that with them. So, but yeah, it is scary because my oldest is 13 now. So it's like the whole, growing up for myself, we were introduced nice and calmly kind of into the whole thing with still naked pictures and stuff like that. If somebody had a Playboy magazine, they were like the king of the school, but now just with a simple Google search, they could get this it's completely explicit. They could just blow their mind right out of the gate. So it is very scary.
It is. And I think the risks are severe, and there's just a lot of other ways to spend great time. And I get the temptation, because screens can be such a distraction that, I think for a lot of parents, it's a way to get some time for yourself. And so certainly not judging anybody who uses it in that capacity. We've really tried for it to be a last resort of entertaining our kids, and have seen the fruits of that at an early age.
Yeah, and you've had an incredible career here, Nick, so far. Obviously, you hit the Time magazine 40 under 40, most influential. What kind of plans or goals do you have here for yourself for the future?
To be content, and I'm a person of faith, and to just trust the Lord with our future, and to be obedient to whatever He calls me and my family to do, and to really, for this season of life, focus on being a great father and a great husband. And I jokingly say, but it's serious, that Jamie and I both have the burden of great parents, and one, we know what a blessing that is. So many people don't, and so we realize, just starting out, how fortunate we are and what a blessing that is. But what comes with that is that, what great parents look like. I know what that means, and to pursue an incredible career, it doesn't mean you can't also be a great parent. You can. People have them, and they do both. But it's just something that in this age of, from the time they're 5 to 12, 13, 14, 15, that era when everything that they believe and most of what they will become happens at that age, they're just like a sponge, that my priority is them, and to be a great provider, again, a great husband, great father, to go wherever the Lord calls our family. But succeeding professionally for the first time in my life, starting really about a year ago, is not my first goal. It's really not my first 3 or 4 goals. And so what I'm doing, in 5 or 10 years is totally unclear to me. But I just believe that if I get this piece right, and if I focus on what kind of legacy I'll have as a father and husband, that the rest of the stuff will work itself out.
Yeah, good stuff, Nick. And you probably touched on it a bit there. But the last thing I'm going to ask you here, I'd love to hit all the dads that come on the podcast here. What type of advice do you have for the new dad or for the about-to-be father who's out there listening?
A few things. I'll just tell you stream of consciousness of what comes to mind. This was a pretty provocative thought that the vice president shared with me when I was considering whether or not to stay at the White House 2 more years or come home. And again, it was provocative when he said it, but he basically said, the notion of quality time is completely bunk. Kids don't speak in quality time. And I said, what do you mean by that? Because, that's such a popular saying. I'm focused on quality time. He said, no, the whole ball game, Nick, about being a father is quantity time. He said, you're never going to be able to schedule when your daughter needs to open up and share something really vulnerable to you. You're never going to be able to schedule time, or they're never going to be willing to schedule time to ask you, a really embarrassing or difficult question, or to share just a raw or emotional moment. You're either there or you're not. And he said, so just don't fall for the trap of quality time. Do your best for quantity time. And that was very, that was very convicting and easy for me to understand and process. And it stuck with me since he told me. So I would just say pour as much time into them as possible. Cut other areas. It's worth it. They'll, kids I found will remember a lot more about what you do than what you say. They'll accept leadership and, correction if they know it comes from love and not anger. I would just say that last, I'd ask your listeners who they most admire in life, and to think about who it is that they most admire. And I'm willing to bet for most of them, it's people who both really love them a lot, but also challenged them. And that's what I think great dads do. If you had to sum it all up, great dads keep no account of wrongs, but we do correct. We build up confidence, but we don't lie or mislead our children about what they can do better. But most of all, we just love them. And, behind, I think, many of society's greatest challenges, unfortunately, and this is why I love this podcast, I think the common denominator are missing dads. And this country, thankfully, has so many unbelievable moms trying to do both jobs. But a father's job is really important. And it's overlooked in our culture. It's critical. And so I would just say showing up, unconditional love, pouring into those children, but setting high expectations and helping them achieve it. Because if we think about who meant the most in our life, certainly for me, it's not people who always told me what I wanted to hear or gave me participation trophies or lied to me or misled me. It's people who, yes, they love me, they encourage me, they built up my self-confidence, but they also had really high standards, and they saw the person I could become, not the person who I was. And I think that's both the challenge and the job responsibility of dads.
Yeah, very well said. I love the message. Nick Ayers, you're a first-class father all the way. This has been an honor for me, and I got to say thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time on First Class Fatherhood.
Thanks for having me. It was an honor to be on the show.